And welcome to this edition of Assembly Calendar. I'm your host, Matt Vischer. Our guest today is one of my favorite members.
You say that to every
He's a
member.
huge fan of mine.
I am indeed.
Yes.
You give me the weather, and it's correct most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. I saw that Facebook post a while back. I'll never get over it.
You got to have fun.
That's right. Yeah. Assemblyman Steve McLaughlin, who represents the 107th Assembly District of Rensselaer, Columbia, and portions of Washington County.
Yep.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Pleasure.
I'm honored. This is my first show I'm doing with you.
Yeah, we'll have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a quick 15 minutes.
It goes by fast.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a lot to say generally, so it goes by pretty quick.
That's right. But we are discussing the Speaker, who has been in the news for months now and continues to be in the news, this time in regard to his frequent miles. It's what is it? Frequent flyer
miles. Yeah, and it just, to me, is just an abuse of the New York State taxpayers that are already the highest taxed people in the nation. This is the Speaker, rather than take a 2-hour and 40-minute train ride, which other members do, or get in his taxpayer-funded vehicle that he doesn't have to pay for, and the gas he doesn't have to pay for, and he has a driver if he wants one. Rather than do that, he turns that 2-hour and 40-minute or 3-hour car trip into a 5-hour, 2-leg airplane trip, because there's no direct service from New York City to Albany, which is pretty unbelievable, but there isn't. When I flew, I flew that trip hundreds of times. But he flies from New York City to either Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. in order to get to Albany. Nobody in their right mind would do that unless it was for personal greed and personal gain. And he's racked up 165,000 miles and counting, and he's spending 3 to 4 times what he needs to make those trips. So it's clearly done so that he can take the frequent flyer miles, and apparently, according to the news reports, brags about his ability to rack up these frequent flyer miles. So my response to the Speaker is donate the miles to the U.S. Airways Miles for Hope program, which is a program that's terrific. And I flew for U.S. Airways for a number of years as a pilot. And I've seen firsthand the benefit and the good that comes from these programs. People donate the miles, and you can transport sick children, wounded veterans, families that may be taking a child on a Make-A-Wish trip to give them a brief break from their illness. So that would be a wonderful thing to do. Let's take this negative and turn it into a positive. So I'm calling on the Speaker to do exactly that and donate those miles, because he didn't earn them. The taxpayers paid for those. The next step of this, that's what we're going to do right now. I'm calling on him to donate the miles. I am going to be submitting legislation that says any accrual of frequent flyer miles or hotel, let's say guest points, if you will, that are incurred by state employees, and we're all state employees, should go into a kitty or a pool that could then be used to pay for future airline flights or hotel stays.
Not a bad idea.
You know, save the people. This is the people's money. And yeah, it might not be billions of dollars, but it all adds up. And either way, it's the people's money. And that's what we're going to be doing very shortly, is submitting that legislation. And I sure hope that the Speaker supports my legislation.
Do we know if the Speaker is taking personal trips or these official government trips he's taking? Do we know at this point?
Well, back and forth to Albany?
Right.
Well, you got to assume we're in session 6 months a year. He's coming back and forth. But he also leaves the chamber very early on what we call getaway day, the last day of the session for the week. He's out of there early in the morning, mid-morning, so that he can get home on a Friday, so that he can get home by sundown, as he's an Orthodox Jew. But there are other Orthodox Jews in that chamber, and they don't get to leave early, but the Speaker does. Meanwhile, his green light goes on, so he's voting when he's not there, but that's just a privilege that the leaders have. I don't begrudge him that. What I'm bothered by is just the abuse of the taxpayers, that, you know what, you do the right thing here. Fix this problem. Stop abusing the taxpayers. That's my message to the Speaker. And I view this as really, from the past year that he's had, this is just one more straw going on that camel. And that camel so far has a pretty strong back, but eventually it's going to break.
Segueing now into women's equality, and of course the Speaker has been now spearheading an effort to curb sexual harassment in the workplace, and that has been an issue too. So he's been in the news for months now.
Well,
it doesn't seem to be going away at this point.
Well, no, he's been a serial enabler, and he's covered up repeated instances of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, rape. He had his chief counsel let out in handcuffs a few years ago. So this man has been a big part of the cover-ups that have gone on here in this culture of corruption. He's the leader of the Assembly. The buck stops with him. And I've repeatedly called on his members to hold a vote of no confidence. The fact that they continue to stand by him is amazing to me. Just last week, the New York Times had an article where they've ignored subpoenas from JCOPE or the Ethics Committee. They requested all documentation on sexual harassment cases. That means all the documentation on all the sexual harassment cases. Well, the Speaker and his legal team ignored those subpoenas, so he willingly flaunts the law, and I'm disgusted by the behavior. The people of New York deserve much better than this, so I'm going to continue to shine a light on it.
And most recently, the governor seems to not publicly be coming out calling for his ouster. Are you surprised by that?
No, I'm not surprised. He hasn't said a word, and I'm not surprised at all that he wouldn't, but I do find it disturbing that he doesn't. He's the leader of the Democrat Party in this state. He should be owning up to the fact that he's got a real problem within his own party with corruption and with cover-ups, but yet it's much more convenient if you're Andrew Cuomo as the governor to leave Sheldon Silver standing in place, because then you've got a willing accomplice to pretty much rubber stamp your agenda, because right now Silver's in such a weakened state that really one word from Andrew Cuomo would probably give Speaker's members enough coverage or courage, if you will, to stand up and hold a vote of no confidence. So Cuomo is playing a game here, and he just figures that it's politically better to keep Speaker Silver standing. But I do think the day is coming where even the governor is going to have to say enough is enough.
Women's equality, getting back to that issue, recently in the State Assembly you passed legislation that would basically give rights to women on a 10-point plan. Mm-hmm. And then there was some issue with the Senate. Let's go ahead. I have some video of you discussing this proposed legislation, and then we'll come back and discuss a little bit.
Supposedly a comprehensive bill that's going to deal with women's equality, much of which is already law, but I would think that it would pass overwhelmingly if all 9 points were there. And for those that say, well, you voted against certain things in the past, the language is different. This would pass, I think, overwhelmingly. I know I would support all 9 of those. I cannot support the 10th plank, as I think many in this chamber cannot. This is a missed opportunity. I don't know why we would not seek comprehensive, far-reaching penalties for sexual harassment, for women that are young women that are abused, or really a woman of any age, of course. And I would think that all of us, whether it was our mother, our sister, our daughter, our wives, if they were harassed at work, we would want that harasser penalized. We would also want the person who enabled it and covered up to be penalized as well. This is sending a message to the state of New York to do as I say, not as I do. This is a missed opportunity by this chamber.
So this basically, the Assembly passed a 10-point. There's 10 measures of this package, this omnibus bill.
Yep.
There's 10 points. The Senate passed 9.
Right.
The Democrats wanted 10, so therefore it didn't pass
both houses.
Both houses.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the 9 points were really not controversial at all, most of which are already law, state and federal law, but we were kind of reiterating what's already law, but that's fine if we wanted to do that. All of us would have gladly signed on to all 9 points, but that 10th point is highly controversial. It's late-term abortion. It's the 7th, 8th, and 9th month. And that's obviously a big sticking point. As a matter of fact, the pro-choice crowd does not tell the truth at all when they say that 80% of New Yorkers support the women's equality agenda. They do in the whole. But when you ask them, do you support late-term abortion, 80% of New Yorkers oppose it. 80% of Americans oppose it because it's a radical procedure. In 7th, 8th, and 9th month, Americans just say enough's enough. Even pro-choice Americans overwhelmingly say no to that. So what we were talking about there was a lot of sexual harassment things and things like that. So I was not going to vote for that 10th point, but I would have definitely voted for all 9. What happened was the Democrats threw a tantrum because they're being dictated to by NARAL, and they kind of had an all-or-nothing attitude where if we don't get all 10, we're going to take our marbles and go home. Well, really, it left the women of New York exposed. We didn't increase penalties for sexual harassment, which is what I was talking about a little bit there. We don't clean up our own house in the Assembly. We should lead by example. We've had repeated sexual harassment problems in the New York State Assembly. No increased penalties for that. So that's a lot about what we were talking about there. But it's a missed opportunity, and it's really a bad move that the Assembly Democrats made here in not saying, okay, let's pass all 9 right now, and then we'll come back and fight about the 10th later. If you have the votes, put it up as a standalone bill. The reality is it's not going to get through the Senate. So, and that's a good thing that it wouldn't get through the Senate. So it was a missed opportunity by the Democrats, a missed opportunity by Andrew Cuomo, who did not stand up and really demand that we pass all 9 points.
It's interesting that the female members of the Democratic Conference of the Assembly, on one hand, are supporting these 10 points, but yet are standing behind the Speaker when it comes to sexual harassment.
Well, interesting. Some might use a different term, which would be hypocrisy, which is the term I would choose. It's hypocritical of them to continue to support this Speaker, who again has a repeated history of covering up sexual harassment and violating the law, and certainly violating women's rights by enabling harassers. So it's a real hypocritical position for them to take, to continue to stand by this man. I just don't understand it.
So what's the future of this? I mean, given that we come back in January, what's the probability that at least 9, which are good bills, pass?
Yeah,
eventually?
well, we could come back in a special session, and that would be my preference. As we come back, I suspect we may be back 1 or 2 days during the fall. Let's pass all 9 at that point, and let's claim victory on both sides, and let's move on. And you want to continue the fight about that 10th point, let's have that debate. But tell the truth to the people about what the bill's all about, and admit that it was really all about late-term abortion, because if it wasn't, they would have said, okay, who wouldn't take 90%? If my kids come home with a 90 out of 100, I'm pretty happy with that. But they had to stand by this and say, we want that late-term abortion. That is not where mainstream America is. It's not where mainstream New York is right now. So they were really out of touch with what was going on here.
Turning to economic development, we recently approved a Startup New York program, which essentially creates these economic empire zone areas for growth within SUNY campuses. I'm going to go ahead and roll an insert with Assemblyman Steve McLaughlin. We'll come back and discuss that a little bit further.
This vote could go either way. There is definitely a few things in this bill that are somewhat of a step in the direction, but I also believe the bill is an admission of how bad New York's climate is. Number 49 on the list of business-friendly states from the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation, an F from the Manufacturing Council of the United States. We are not getting the job done. Now, I understand that you could say this is a step in the right direction, and it is a very small step. But I believe, as John F. Kennedy did, that a rising tide lifts all boats. And my loyalty lies with the people of my district, those entrepreneurs, those business owners that get up every single day and pound through this economy that has struggled for far too long. I want to help them. That's what we should be doing, is reaching out to them, making their life a little better, their life a little bit easier. I think this is what happens. This bill was thrown together at the last minute because we have a governor whose ratings are tanking in upstate New York. Let's face facts. That's what this is all about. It wasn't in the state of the state. It wasn't even on his radar. He threw this together. It was supposed to be a lifeline for upstate New York. Suddenly we've drawn in the entire state. Not that the entire state doesn't need a better business climate. It does. But you've got to help every business that's existing right now. Level the playing field for all of them, cut their taxes, make their life easier, and things will grow. This is what happens when you have leadership, a governor that has never spent a day of his life in the private sector, has no idea what makes an economy grow. And it's by helping all businesses succeed and thrive. That's what brings new businesses in, a thriving economy. Look to the other states that are doing a little bit better than New York and find a way to do what they're doing.
And, of course, we're back with Assemblyman Steve McLaughlin. You can always reach the Assemblyman on Facebook, correct?
Yep, Steve McLaughlin or Assemblyman Steve McLaughlin, and I'm on Twitter at SteveMCNY.
Thank you very much, Assemblyman, for being with us today. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Assembly Calendar. Until next time, take care. Have a great day.